Welcome to the Bold and Gold podcast. My name is Elijah Winfrey. Joining me is Patience Beach. We got a whole bunch to talk about when it comes to Georgia Tech athletics, specifically football. Patience, most important question I'm going to ask you today. How are you doing? And it seems like you got out of Florida just in time, my friend.
I'm doing pretty good, but yes, sir, we definitely got out just in time. I hate the situation that's going on with all the hurricanes, man. It looks like a mess over there, but definitely sending our thoughts and prayers most of all, and hope that everyone is staying safe during this time, and hopefully it'll all clear out and we can get back to our normal lives.
For sure. Yeah. I used to live in Florida for a little while. I lived in the New Smyrna Beach area. I feel like I've lived everywhere, but anyway, hurricanes are no joke. So I want to wish everybody in Florida that might be watching this show or might come across this show, the very best when it comes to dealing with this situation. Switching focus here over to the football side of things. That's what we're here to talk about here on the Bold and Gold podcast. We have got a lot to discuss when it comes to stat leaders. Now, as everybody knows, right now we are 1-3 on the football season for Georgia Tech. And there were some changes that were made. We'll get to that in a second. But first, I want to give you where we're at stat-wise so that folks have some stats they can hang on to as we head up against Pittsburgh this Saturday night. So looking at the passing stats for our team, Jess Simpsons, right now he has got 59% of his passes that are being completed, which is better for him than the last 2 years. That has been an improvement. Yardage-wise, he's got 739 yards. He's thrown 2 touchdowns, but unfortunately he's thrown 2 interceptions, and it has not been the type of campaign that a lot of people thought he was going to be having, lighting up the scoreboard and things like that. There's been a lot of questions about Jess Simpsons, unfortunately, with some plays late in games where folks are questioning, what's going on? Why is he running out of bounds instead of trying to put his body on the line to get the first down? There's just been a lot of questions, unfortunately. And obviously that's going to happen when the team has started off 1-3. But for Jess Simpsons, he has, improved the completion percentage, but people are a little frustrated because they're not seeing the touchdowns go up and the interceptions stay down. And obviously that's something that he still has the rest of the season to work on. Looking at the running game has kind of been a struggle this season, if we're being honest with ourselves. Jess Simpsons right now is second on the team in rushing. We just finished talking about his passing ability. He's got 111 yards running the ball, which is an average of about 2 yards a carry. And as far as our leading rusher, that would be Dante Smith, who's run for 191 yards. He's averaging 6 yards a carry when he does get the ball, and he's got 3 touchdowns. Now, many people will remember those 3 touchdowns came against Western Carolina. And like I said, it's been rough sledding against other teams when we try to run the ball. This was supposed to be a 3-headed monster running the football this season between Dante Smith, Hassan Hall, and Dillon McDuffie. But admittedly, it's been off to kind of a slow start with our 2 transfer running backs that have come in. Hassan Hall out of Louisville came into Georgia Tech with a lot of, a lot of hype around him. He's run for 103 yards this season. Dillon McDuffie came out of Buffalo. He's got 41 yards this season. And, again, they still have the entire rest of the season to get their stats up, and I'm sure they will do that. But for Tech fans, we like to keep it real. Okay. And that's the situation that we're in right now. Receiving, let's get to that here. So for receiving yards, Nate McCollum has got 158 receiving yards on the season and no touchdowns, but again, 18 catches for 158 yards. He leads the team. The next closest to him in receptions would be Malachi Carter with 8 receptions for 153 yards and a touchdown. EJ Jenkins, who we talked a lot about in the first week, he's got 7 passes for 88 yards and a touchdown. So that is the situation there, passing the ball. And on defense for us, Keon White has got 4 sacks on the season. Obviously, he's been playing pretty well. Ace Ely and Charlie Thomas have also been playing well, although Charlie Thomas has had issues with, unfortunately, targeting calls. It's been kind of his Achilles heel. He plays great football. Unfortunately, though, he's already been disciplined 1 time this year for a targeting call. He'll be disciplined again this weekend. You won't see him for the first half against Pittsburgh. So that's the situation on the Georgia Tech side. Switching over to the Pittsburgh side, Patience, what do you have for us? And what are your initial impressions of the stats that I just gave you?
Well, I think it's really impressive seeing the stats from Dante Smith, because I said a lot coming into this, feed Dante. It's not putting shade on any of the other running backs, but that was, the whole moral of the story after Jahmyr Gibbs left. But I really think it's impressive looking at his 191 rushing yards, and then Jeff Sims right behind him with 125. I always said Jeff Sims is fast on his feet, and that is definitely true. I think it's very incredible. And Nate McCollum, making a name for himself, 158 receiving yards. I think that's really impressive, and it's really good to see that out of that group. But heading over to the Pitt side, as we are playing Pittsburgh this Saturday, should be a nice game. But he is overall has 66 completion percentage, which is really fantastic, for 692 yards with 2 touchdowns and just 1 interception. So that's definitely somebody we have got to get to defensively. On defense, got to get to him quick, make the play, finish the play. And they have some other quarterbacks as well that have done pretty good, but not quite has the hype like Keaton. And then rushing and receiving wise, Israel Abindiga has 479 yards rushing, averaging about 5.8 yards a carry, which is impressive, with 6 touchdowns. So all eyes on him for sure. And receiving, he has 59 yards on 6 receptions, averaging about 14.8 yards. So that's impressive. Vincent Davis right behind him with 148 yards, which on 23 attempts, averaging about right behind. He's averaging 6.4 yards. So with a touchdown, which is really, again, is really impressive. Defensively, Cervica Dennis is leading the team with 3 sacks. So he's definitely a guy to watch. Again, he is out of all of them, he is leading, which is really impressive with the 3 sacks. And then kicking, you have Ben Sauls. He is perfect on extra point attempts, 18 out of 18. Field goal percentage, 66%. So that's kudos to him for that. That is also impressive. Sam Vanderhaar is the punter, obviously. He's averaging about 39.4 yards, which is a punt. So that is also impressive. That is all the stats I have for Pitt.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you, Patience, for giving us those stats. The quarterback that Patience was talking about, by the way, is Keaton Slovis. Keaton Slovis for Pitt. That is their main guy. He's actually a transfer quarterback from Southern California. So that is where he's from. He's now the Pitt quarterback. Pitt, by the way, new offensive coordinator. It is no longer the Mark Whipple offense, but you wouldn't know that based on the offensive output that they are doing this season, because Pitt has obviously been pretty good. Unfortunately, when you're losing, changes are going to happen. And we're going to go into this next topic respectfully and try to talk about our former head coach, Geoff Collins, with a little bit of class here. That's what we like to try to do anyway. Obviously, anytime a coach gets fired, it's an emotional situation. And we are not fans, at least Patience and I are not fans who are going to celebrate a man getting fired and his life being changed and his family's life being changed. But what I do want to say about this coaching change, I'll go first here, is that I was hoping it would never happen. I was hoping that it would never have to happen. I understand fans get frustrated. I understand that, boosters with a lot more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime, kind of force certain situations with a lot of different teams. It's not just Georgia Tech this year that's making an in-season coaching change. Arizona State did it. Nebraska did it. My issue, and I'll just be honest here, my issue here is that for an institution that prides itself on being classy, I don't feel like we handled this in the classy way possible. Geoff Collins, from everything I've read through different sources, he was not allowed to say goodbye to the team himself. He didn't even get a chance to tell his coaching staff that he was no longer going to be there. That was done by the president of the institute. And I feel like it wouldn't hurt anything for him to be able to say goodbye to his players. So that's kind of my first thought when it comes to all this. The second thought is a lot of the players are not happy about the fact that this change was made. And you saw former players like Wanye Thomas come out and say, hey, Coach Collins really helped me. And you saw parents come out and say, Coach Collins really helped their kids and spent significant time with their kids. So I think one thing that I will always remember about the Geoff Collins era is the way that he cared for the kids in his program and the way that he cared about the Georgia Tech football team, Georgia Tech school, and the things he did to try to set us up for success, because the next coach coming in is going to have a much better recruiting situation than what Jeff Collins was given when he first came in. And that's because of Jeff Collins hitting the pavement, getting around the state of Georgia, getting in those high schools, and, really, meeting kids where they're at instead of expecting them, well, if they're interested, then they'll come to us. I know a lot of the players are not happy with the coaching change happening mid-season. I'm not either. I think we could have waited till the end of the season. But again, people with big pockets, with deep pockets, they get in certain people's ears, and all of a sudden there's changes that are made. So again, I don't know what the rest of the season would have done for Jeff Collins. Maybe we would have gotten it together and went to a bowl game. I don't know. We'll never know the end of that story. What we do know is that he was fired after going 1-3. He's no longer the head coach. Brent Key is the interim head coach. And I wish Brent Key nothing but success. I will say, though, I don't feel like this is really a fair job interview for him. I was talking to Patience about this before the show started today. Interim head coaches rarely ever end up getting the job. And the reason why is because they're being forced to use coaches who they've coached with and probably have a great relationship with, but might not be the people that they would have wanted running their offense or running their defense. And so Brent Key's coming into this situation, trying to stabilize the ship. And he's coming into a situation where most likely every single one of those coaches, sure, they're going to do what they're paid to do, which is coach our team. But let's not sugarcoat this. Let's not, put the rose-colored glasses on and act like, oh, well, they're only about this current job. They're not, okay? They are looking for their next job. And that's what they have to do because they're professionals. And that's a part of this game. So, yes, they're going to give their everything, what they can give to Georgia Tech for the rest of this season. Make no doubt about that, because that's what they're paid to do. But they're also going to be looking for their next opportunity. So, for me, I don't feel like that's ever really a fair situation for an interim head coach, because you're judging them based off of what they do with somebody else's coaches. And that, to me, is not necessarily fair. But I don't think Brent Key's going to get this job anyway, unless he goes undefeated or beats Georgia or something like that. Then maybe that's a conversation. But I will say I feel for Brent Key in the situation he's in, and I do wish him the very best of luck. Patience, I've talked for a long time. What's your opinion on all this?
I'm in the same boat as you, and I agree with everything you said 100%. I actually sent a message to Coach Collins, and I know I'm in the minority of, I was a fan of his, and I'm not a fan of firing anybody, especially Coach Collins. I thought he was a great guy. When he came in the program, he brought the energy, the positivity. We needed a fresh start, and I felt like he brought that. And I know a lot of people was like, well, look at the win-loss record. Okay, I get that, but it's more than that, big picture-wise. And I told him I dread the day that he would get fired, because we all knew eventually it was going to come. I mean, unfortunately, because of the way the years have gone. But like we talked about with the Kentucky, about how just give them a chance and see, where it goes. And I know we had talked about that. But, I wish him nothing but the best. I wish things would have worked out differently. And I know it's going to be hard for Brent Key coming in here. First game, you got Pitt. So it's like you're hitting the ground running immediately. And right now, I think everybody has the idea that this is just temporary. This is not, like you were saying, he probably won't get the job. I love him as a guy, and I hope he does well coaching, but I definitely think everybody's got in mind in the, President Cabrera, that we're gonna find another coach. Well, we got to find the athletic director first, which we'll get into that later. But it is what it is. But I wish things would have been differently, and I support Coach Collins, and I still will be a fan of him wherever he goes. But besides all that, I do wish Brent Key the best of luck with the 8 games. This is his audition to see what he can do. See, maybe he could get the job, like you said, beating a Georgia or going undefeated, whatever. But, he's got to hit the ground and just run with it. So we'll see where it all goes. But, it is what it is.
Well, and we're going to talk about the AD situation a little bit later on, because I do have some thoughts on that as well. But right now, we want to talk about what everybody else is talking about when it comes to Georgia Tech, and that is coaching candidates here and who we think might be a good fit for our Yellow Jackets moving forward. Patience, do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
You can go first. I'll let you go first.
So I've got three candidates, and I want to first say why I am looking at these three gentlemen. Okay. So I am looking at these gentlemen because they are all respected in the coaching community in high school football in Georgia. And that was kind of the basis for what I'm looking at. A lot of other people are looking at who else has had success in college football, you know, who are the big names that everybody's trying to attach to this job, whether that's, you know, worthy of being attached or not, or if it's a pie in the sky dream. I'm looking at who is respected in Georgia high school football that we could bring in, who knows all the high school coaches already, and would probably be able to, you know, facilitate more sit-down meetings with them than having to work to build those relationships because they already have them. So let me get into some of the guys that I'm looking at here. And Patience probably knows some of these folks because she lives in the Georgia area. And I would expect that if you're watching this podcast, you probably know these folks too. So my first candidate is Jess Simpson. Now, Jess Simpson, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, right now he is the co-defensive coordinator at Duke. He's also a defensive line coach at Duke. He used to be a defensive line coach for a season at Miami, and he also was attached to Georgia State for a little bit of time. But what he is really known for in the state of Georgia is for winning 7 state titles with the Buford Wolves. And his head coaching record for Buford, because he coached for them from 2005 to 2016, was 164 wins to 12 losses. That is a 93% win percentage, in case you're, you know, not as good at math. And I had to look that up before the show, so that was not off the top of my head. But he had great success at Buford. Buford takes their football program very, very seriously. And he is somebody who knows a lot of the coaches in the state of Georgia. He is 52 years old, so he's right within that age range that you would expect for a head coach at this job. And, you know, I just feel like if you're going to get somebody, you're going to try to recruit kids from Georgia, why not get somebody who can walk into a room and say, hey, I've won a state title game 7 times. I don't know very many people that have done that. So Jess Simpsons is my first candidate that I would look at. And a lot of these guys have a little bit of college experience, meaning they're either coaching at college level right now or they have in the past. And I did that because it's so easy for us to discredit high school coaches and say, well, he's just a high school coach. He's never done it at the college level. But folks, 7 state titles he won at Buford. That's hard to do. So Jess Simpson is my first one that I wanted to mention. My next one that I wanted to mention is Joey King. Now, Joey King right now is the wide receiver coach at Coastal Carolina, but that's not what he's known for. He's known for his record with Cartersville because he used to be their head coach. From 2014 to 2018, he led the Hurricanes to 4 state title appearances and 2 state championships. And oh, by the way, he was the coach for Trevor Lawrence when Trevor Lawrence was in high school. His record at Cartersville as the head coach, 67-4 was his record as a high school coach, which again, if you're looking for percentage, that's 94%. Right now, like I said, he's a wide receiver coach at Coastal Carolina. He's a young coach, but he does have that prowess. He's an offensive-minded guy, which would be different than what we've had in the last 4 years, because Jeff Collins obviously was a defensive-style coach. So this would be going a different direction, offensive side of the ball. But again, Joey King, right now, he is the wide receiver coach at Coastal Carolina. I think he would make an interesting candidate for head coach for Georgia Tech. And my last one is Kenny Dallas. Now, Kenny Dallas used to coach for Landmark Christian out of Fairburn, Georgia. That's where I first heard about him because that's my dad's alma mater. And when he was at Landmark Christian in Fairburn, Georgia, he led that program to an 88-41 record during his time there at Landmark. Most recently, he has helped start the football program at Trinity Christian in Georgia. I believe it's in Coweta County. And he is 52-14 as a head coach at Trinity Christian. And when I was thinking about why Kenny Dallas, here's why. Kenny Dallas is at some pretty small private schools who have high academic standards and not a lot of money necessarily to play with when it comes to their football program. And he has still been able to make some wins happen. He is also an offensive-minded guy. In fact, his two sons, I believe, play at Georgia Southern. But he has produced some pretty high prolific passers in his time as a head coach. So those are my three guys. By the way, Kenny Dallas, 140 and 55 total as a high school football coach, a win percentage of 71%. And I guarantee you, none of those guys are on anybody's radar. Okay. But for me, I'm looking at it going, okay, who knows the state of Georgia better than Georgia high school football coaches? And if you look around the country right now, there's a lot of people who will say Georgia high school coaches and college coaches, there's not a whole lot of separation between the two, because right now Georgia is having their golden years of high school football. So again, for me, if I had to rank them, I'd say Jess Simpson with his 7 titles at Buford. I'd give him a call. Right now he's at Duke. I'm sure he'd love to come home. Joey King at Coastal Carolina with his 67-4 record as a former high school football coach for Cartersville, and again was the one to produce Trevor Lawrence, and then Kenny Dallas. So those are my 3. Patience, who do you have? And obviously we know everybody's talking about Deion Sanders, but he's not on either one of our lists, right?
Correct. He is actually not on my list, surprisingly. And actually, you had some interesting candidates that I did not expect. I won't lie. I did not expect those at all. And I actually did not have them on my list, which is, again, surprising. I actually had, and these are some interesting, I just did a little research, not a lot, because obviously I'm not the one finding the coaches. But I looked into Charles Huff from Marshall. He's 17-9 overall, so it's not, oh, wow, that's really impressive. I mean, he has a 5.29 winning percentage. You know, that's people like, oh, that's over 500, you know. But I actually had him, Charles Huff from Marshall. And it's funny because you mentioned one of Coastal's Carolina. You mentioned one of those guys. I actually had Jamie Chadwell as one of mine, because that's been a big name mentioned, is Jamie Chadwell, which I am on board with 100%. Not a lot of people, I mean, some people are talking about him, not a lot. Everybody's Deion Sanders, which I'm not opposed to that, but you got to look at reality here. Another one I had, so that was 2. My third one was Dell McGee from Georgia. I know, I was like, oh, Georgia assistant. He is a running backs coach, so he hasn't had a lot of head coaching experience. But I think when you look at the state of Georgia recruiting wise and all the big picture, I really think he's a good candidate to take over. I mean, I would go with Dell McGee or Jamie Chadwell. Those are my top 2. Jamie would probably be my first one, and then Dell. But I think those are 2 big names that stick out to me that I would love to see at Georgia Tech. But, you know, I just want, you know, we all just want to win. So whoever it may be, we're just going to roll with it. So, but those were my 3 that I had on my list. So a little bit different from yours, but hey, you know, it works.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to mention, you know, Patience was talking about the gentleman who is the running backs coach for Georgia, Dell, right? Okay. So Dell is a huge recruiter for the Georgia Bulldogs. I know we don't like to talk about them. We hate it when they have success. I get all that, but he is somebody who really knows how to hit the pavement and get commitments. So if Georgia Tech was to get somebody like that, I could certainly see the benefit. Jamie Chadwell's done a great job at Coastal Carolina. They've kind of been that sweetheart team over the past few years. And when I say sweetheart team, I mean no disrespect. What I mean is that everybody in the country ends up rooting for them, even though that they have no connection to the school whatsoever. So when you can inspire that in the entire country, that's obviously pretty impressive. And Marshall, I thought that was a very interesting one, Patience, because they did beat Notre Dame earlier on in the season, and they were looking pretty good and still are looking pretty good. So, you know, that is certainly a good program. I've always had a sweet spot in my heart for Marshall, only because when I was in middle school, and I'll keep this brief, but I think it was when I was in middle school. Yeah. We had to do a project based on a historic thing that happened. I did mine based on the plane crash that happened for Marshall, because We Are Marshall was coming out that year. And I actually went and saw the movie, and then I did my report on it. I forget my grade that I got on that project, but that was, you know, that's always given me a soft place in my heart for Marshall and in their football program. Moving on here, you know, before we move on, comment below who you would have as a head coaching option, because it's very easy to sit there and say, well, Elijah and Patience don't know what they're talking about. But who would you want to see in this job? And I just want to say, I'm not against Deion Sanders. Okay. Neither is Patience. We would love that. If that happens, that's great. But I'm also not going to sit here and put all my eggs in one basket. Okay. Deion Sanders has made a commitment to HBCUs, a very honorable commitment, by the way, to HBCUs, because he's not just helping Jackson State. He's been helping getting some other former players to come and coach at HBCUs. Eddie George is at, I believe it's Tennessee State, if I'm not mistaken. Hugh Jackson is over at Grambling now, and those coaches probably wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for Deion Sanders coming into the HBCU. So he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done. He's a very good coach. He coached in high school. He's coaching college. He's had success at both levels. So I get why everybody is excited about it, not just with the Atlanta connections. But again, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket, because Deion is somebody who does stay committed. If he says, I'm going to be here, I'm going to do this thing, he's going to do that thing. And right now, that thing is coaching at HBCUs and building that up. So again, I would pump the brakes on that one if you're a Georgia Tech fan and your heart's set on Deion Sanders, because again, his heart is set on coaching HBCUs, and his son is at Jackson State as well. Which I want to mention this real quick before we move on to the AD situation, because this is important, and I hate it when people take something out of context. Okay, so Deion Sanders was on the Rich Eisen show. Him and Rich Eisen are very good friends. Rich Eisen and him were having a conversation about why is Deion Sanders' son not up for the Heisman Trophy. And Rich Eisen was talking about, well, it's probably because he plays for an HBCU, and people say a lot of things about HBCUs and the talent level there and things like that. Rich Eisen then saw an opportunity to throw in a question about all those Georgia Tech rumors. So he did. He said, any interest in the Georgia Tech job, any truth to that? And Deion Sanders, being a smart man, redirected the question back to his players at Jackson State. And what he said was, let me get this straight. So you're saying I'm good enough as a coach at Jackson State to move on to the next level and coach a bigger school, but my son, even though he's got some of the best stats in the entire country, is not good enough to be included in the Heisman. And then Rich Eisen tried to say, so you're going to take your son to Georgia Tech with you? And again, they were kind of joking around, but that one little soundbite has gotten all over Twitter and gotten the entire Georgia Tech fan base all excited. And literally all it was a redirect on the question. So pump the brakes. Okay. He was not saying he's coming to Georgia Tech. He was saying it's nice to be thought of, because it sure is, but he was not saying I'm going to Georgia Tech. So if that was the only thing that you're holding on to as your piece of evidence, pump the brakes. Let's go into the athletic director situation here. So my opinion on the athletic director situation, I think it's very unfortunate that we let go of Todd Stansbury. I know he gave Jeff Collins a 7-year contract, and everybody was up in arms about that. And everybody's saying it's because of Jeff Collins that Todd Stansbury was let go because he chose to be loyal. Number one, I'm going to say it right now. I respect the heck out of Todd Stansbury for being loyal in that situation, because he very easily could have thrown Jeff Collins under the bus. He never did. So I will always have respect for Todd Stansbury for how he handled that situation, regardless of what fans in our fan base might think about it. The other thing is, I feel like he was done dirty by Georgia Tech, because every other program that you can look at on our athletics is doing well right now. And you're going to fire him because football's not doing good. And look, football is my favorite sport. Okay. It really is. But I am not somebody who's going to sit here and say, well, football's the only sport. So, and you also look at all the money he brought into Georgia Tech over the last few years. They were able to hit some big initiatives, and they got some big projects that they're going to be doing construction on and are already doing construction on. And they're going to let him go because he couldn't get the football coach right. And everybody acts like that's fine and acceptable. Not to me. Not when your job is all of athletics. That should have been taken into consideration. I don't feel that it was. And I know that they're going to be looking for the athletic director first. Patience, your initial thoughts on the situation with Todd Stansbury and your candidates for athletic director. We got 9 minutes left in today's episode. Patience.
I definitely don't think they did Todd Stansbury right because, like you were saying, you have to look at it, the big picture, all the athletics, not just football. Because if you zone in on football, it's like, come on, man. Like, really? You're really just going to zone in on the head coach he hired? Like, because I think he's really doing a great job with the volleyball, with basketball, with overall. I think he's been one of the best athletic directors we've had in a while. No shade to the other athletic directors, but I don't feel like he was done right. I felt like they didn't handle the situation right. And I felt like they should have given him more time. The same with Coach Collins. I just wish they would have given him more time to see what could happen because he's been really good. But unfortunately, with the wheels are got to keep moving. The train's got to keep going. So the show must go on, as I say. So the three candidates I had, interesting enough, the first one I had was Kevin Cone, actually the Georgia Tech assistant athletic director. I thought I had him as one. I had Graham Neff, the Clemson athletic director. And then this one was interesting. I had Katie Turner. She is the she's at Florida. She is the assistant AD. Her name is big with recruiting. And I know it's like, oh, really? Like athletic director recruiting, but she was another big name that I had seen some people throwing out and I did some research. So those were the three I had, but I feel like if I had to go in order, I would probably do Graham Neff first and then Kevin Cone second and then Katie last. So those were the three I had. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I don't know if you even thought about those, but that was my list.
So for me, Patience, I did a lot more research on the coaches, admittedly, than I did the athletic director situation, but I did have somebody who I think Georgia Tech fans should take a serious look at, and that is Doug Dillon from Appalachian State. Dillon has been at Appalachian State since 2015. He actually was the person who oversaw their transition from football championship series to football bowl division or bowl subdivision, I believe is what they call it. So basically from FCS to FBS, you get my point. But he oversaw that whole transition for Appalachian State. And if you haven't been keeping up with Appalachian State, they got themselves a good football program over there. They literally took North Carolina down to the wire. They also beat Texas A&M. Like they've got a good football program over there and one that is pretty serious. And more importantly, they don't got a single seat in the house that is not taken up by an Appalachian State fan. And that speaks volumes to me because that's one thing that I'm going to just say it. I absolutely hate about our fan base is that, we have a lot of people that don't show for games and then they complain about how we don't have money for things. It's like, well, anyway, my point though, is that you need somebody in there who can energize the fan base, get butts in the seats. And that happens with more than just who the head football coach is. So I would say Doug Dillon from Appalachian State, take a serious look at him. Take a look at what he's done. Look at the money he's brought into a small school like Appalachian State, who plays in the Sun Belt Conference. And look at what he's been able to do there. Utah State's athletic director has also been mentioned as a candidate. I'll be honest, I don't know much about Utah State's football program or any of their other programs, but that is just a name that has been mentioned. So I want to throw that out there. And actually, ironically enough, out of Florida, Linda Keeler is the associate athletic director for Florida. And she's done a really good job there. She's been there for a little while. I wouldn't mind making some history because I don't think Georgia Tech's ever had a woman as the athletic director. I think, if you look at that lady's credentials, and I'm sure if you look at the lady that Patience also mentioned, their credentials are deep and they know what they're doing. So, I know there's going to be some people out there who, for whatever reason, try to act like women can't do as good of a job as men in that position. Like, that's from the 50s. You should probably leave it there. Okay. Because women can do just as great of a job. I can tell you right now, my wife runs my life. And if she didn't, I'd be in shambles. So, but I'm just saying, I wouldn't mind, having a little bit of a historic thing and giving somebody an opportunity that they have earned and deserved. And again, I think that could happen as well. So, but for me, I just had the two candidates for athletic director. And, for me, if I had to pick a pairing, I would say maybe Jess Simpson. Again, he's at Duke right now. He's coaching defensive line at Duke. We'll see them in a few weeks. And if you're impressed with that defensive line, remember, he's got 7 state titles from Georgia that you could use to your advantage and a record Let me look that up again. 93% as a head coach in high school football in the state of Georgia, playing against the big boys. We're not talking about, little bitty schools either. Buford's pretty big. So that's something. And I wouldn't be shocked, by the way. I couldn't find anybody to use as an example, but I wouldn't be shocked if Georgia Tech goes after one of the Georgia high school athletic directors for some of these mega high schools, because some of them have major campuses nowadays. It's not like, there's a little bitty gymnasium and a little bitty football field with like 500 seats. Like some of these places, as you know, if you live in the state of Georgia, they are gigantic. Think about Valdosta Stadium. So again, they might go for somebody like that. But I think for Georgia Tech, they cannot get wrapped up in the sauce. And the sauce is saying, well, just because this person was at Clemson or just because this person was at Oklahoma, that's who we need to get. Really widen the search and find somebody who is unique enough to be able to get things back on track. That's my opinion. Let's take a look here at this week's game. It's an 8:00 game on Saturday on ACC Network. It's at Pittsburgh. Patience, we got 3 minutes here, so take about a minute and give us your thoughts on this game.
Okay, my quick thoughts. First, the cold and rain that is expected on Saturday night is going to be very difficult for the guys. I mean, I know we're in Georgia, so we're not used to the cold as much as people in Pittsburgh. But I think the most thing to watch in that game is the Pitt defense, because they're going to generate a lot of pressure and probably ruin most of the game plans that we have going. But if you look at it stat-wise, the Georgia Tech's offense they might be more dangerous in this game, because if you look at the stats overall, Georgia Tech's got them by just a little bit, So I think it's going to be interesting to see how our offense pairs against this defense, because this is going to be one of the best defenses we face besides Clemson and Georgia, obviously. So I think Pitt is going to worry about generating a lot of pressure. I think Georgia Tech is just going to do their best to try to score. And like last week, you get in the end zone 5 times, you have to score 5 times, okay? You can't go 5 times and not. And that was a struggle last week. So I think this week, when you're in the end zone, you've got to score. So that's just my quick recap of it. So, I just compete.
Well, Patience, I have to agree with everything you said. For me, I'm looking at something a little different, though. I'm looking at communication on the sidelines. This is the first time that Brent Key is going to be having that headset on. He's been the assistant head coach. He's worked with the offensive line. And I will say briefly, does it give me a little heartburn to think about the fact that our quarterback has been getting his head taken off the entire season, and that's the guy that is supposed to right the ship right now? Because you're literally taking Brent Key out of that offensive line room and you're having him do everything, having to be in all the different rooms. That does give me a little bit of heartburn, because he's not going to be able to spend as much time with the offensive line like he normally does, and they need help right now with their youth. But anyway, he's going to have that headset on. How does he do? How does he do in those high pressure situations? Clock management. Those are all big things. And this will be his first time doing it. So that's something that I'm looking at. I'm also looking at what does he do with Jeff Sims? If Jeff Sims starts playing bad or not getting the job done, is he going to bench him? Because you never saw that with Jeff Collins. But at this point, something's got to give. And if you're not out there scoring touchdowns, then you might have to put somebody else in, because we do have some highly touted backup quarterbacks that came from other schools for that reason, to be able to try to do something with this team. So I don't have a score prediction for you. I will be watching. And obviously I'll be rooting for Brent Key and the boys. We'll see what happens. But for Patience and myself, that's going to do it for Bold and Gold this week. Thank you for watching. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. We'll see you next week.